Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the courtroom. It's good to have you back here today. I'm Ms. Whipple, and we're here to learn more about the three branches of government from people who actually work in Connecticut's three branches of government. And I'm going to have our guests introduce themselves, but I want to say that in this group today we have students from Relive Academy. You want to raise your hands? Ivy Drive School, Gainfield Elementary School, and Crack Anna Grace Academy of the Arts. So we have 4 great Connecticut schools here. And as I understand it, each school has developed some questions that you would like to ask today. Does every school have at least one question to ask? Okay. Then what I'm going to do is ask a teacher from a school to choose the student who's got the question, if there's a student who was assigned the question, and then our guests will answer the questions. But first, I would like them to say a few words about themselves and what they do.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. How's everyone doing? Good. So, really happy to be here with you today. My name is Eric Russell, and I am the state treasurer here in Connecticut. So my job is ultimately about managing all of the state's money. So I make sure that we are paying all of our bills on time, that we're making good investments. And I've been doing this job for about a year. I got elected at the end of 2022. And so have been on the job for a little over a year and have been really enjoying the work. I'm an attorney by trade, so before I ran for office, I was a finance attorney, and I did that for about 11 years before running for office. So look forward to your questions and hanging out with you today.
Good afternoon, buenas tardes. How's everybody doing? Good. My name is Hilda Santiago. I am a state representative from Meriden. Meriden is mostly in the middle of the state, 20 minutes from Hartford and 20 minutes from New Haven. I've been a state representative now for 12 years. I was elected in 2012. And one of my biggest responsibilities is enacting or making or changing or bringing in new ideas for laws for the state of Connecticut. So the state capitol, the executive branch, there's the governor, and then there's the state reps, and well, the constitutionals go next. There's a whole row of constitutionals, and below that is the state senate and the state rep. And then the government after that would be like your local city government and your local board of ed, just so that you have a picture of where we go to as far as making laws in the state of Connecticut. And we could talk a little bit more about that. And again, thank you for having me here too.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dennis Evely. I'm a judge and I currently sit on the appellate court. For 7.5 years, I sat on the Supreme Court of the state of Connecticut until I hit the Supreme Court's mandatory retirement age. I've been a judge over 25 years now and previously was a lawyer, and I've actually been a lawyer sworn in over 51 years now. And I thank you for coming today, and I look forward to answering your questions if I can. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I'm going to ask each school to have someone ask a question, and the first one would be, is there a question from Relive Academy? So this is a question about the legislative branch, and the question is, how long does it take to pass a law?
Well, that's a good question. So it all depends. I go to my constituents, so the citizens that vote me in Meriden, in a certain district, and I have round tables, I have town halls, and I go to Stop and Shop, and I go to neighborhood associations, and I get ideas on what laws to enact in the state of Connecticut. So you can have an idea, because our elections, our term is for 2 years. So you can start, last year was the first year of the term. It goes from January to June. And this year we go from February to March. So let's say I put in for law last year. So the law that I put in last year was for barbers, barber shops or barbers to get to be trained when they go for their license to be trained to deal with autistic kids, right? There's not a lot of barbers that know how to deal with children with disabilities, especially autistic kids. So I got an idea from a barber. Him and his wife, who's a social worker, put a curriculum together, and I introduced that idea last year. Well, it didn't go anywhere. So this year, I have to reintroduce the idea so that hopefully the General Assembly and the Senate will enact the law, so then it becomes a law in May, and then the governor signs the law, so that barbers that are being trained, let's say, starting January 1st, because most of our laws either start January 1st or July 1st, that when they go to get trained to be a barber, that now it includes in their curriculum, you know how you have an education curriculum at school, that they will learn also how to deal and how to treat children that have disabilities and also autistic. Because right now, you can go to a barber and the barber might not know how to deal with you, so your mom is gonna have to take you out of there and go to somebody else that can cut your hair. Or when you go to a beauty salon or a hair salon. So that law now, I enacted it last year, I put it in for last year, it didn't go anywhere, so now I have to work double hard this year to convince my colleagues, there's 187 of us, to help to make that law a reality for May. So sometimes laws go into effect right away and the ideas come out, but sometimes it might take a year, sometimes it might take 2 years, sometimes it might take 3 years. So it all depends on what the law is. That's the easiest way to answer that.
Thank you. That was very good. So I think next we will go to Ivy Drive School, and if a teacher can select one of your students to ask a question, and we might have one about another branch of government, or all three.
The question is for the judicial branch, and it's about how many cases are there in a year?
This is for the judicial branch, and it is how many cases are there in a year?
How many cases in a year? Okay, wow, good question. Well, I can break it down, at least for the appellate court. When I was on the Supreme Court, at our height, we handled about 150 cases a year. The appellate court handles about around 600 to 900 cases a year. Then we have a level called the trial court, which is the superior court branch, which generates all these cases. They have criminal and civil trials, and there are literally thousands of cases pending there. At one point, I was in charge of all the civil cases in Connecticut, and when I did that, we had over 30,000 cases pending in Connecticut. So there are thousands of cases, in answer to your question, at the trial level that are tried each year.
That was a great question and great answer. A little bit overwhelming, though. The next question will be from a student from Gainfield Elementary School. Could you repeat that, please? How long is the process to decide if a law is constitutional?
Okay, thank you for that. Excellent question. I'm going to give you an example of, while I was on the Supreme Court, the case that took the longest to decide, and that was a constitutional question. The case came up, first of all, through the trial court level, and by the time it reached the Supreme Court, the legislature had passed an act. It involved a man who was in prison. He was on the death penalty. He was awaiting the death penalty at the time. And the legislature determined that there shouldn't be any more death penalty in Connecticut, but for all those people on death row, they could still be executed. So the question for the Supreme Court was whether or not having a law passed where it was the policy of the state not to have anyone executed, was it still constitutional to have people executed? That case was argued before us, and it took the longest to determine of any case we had that I was there, and I think one of the longest in our history to determine whether that was constitutional. And we found that that provision was unconstitutional, and that took over 2 years to get the decision out on that.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Now we have Anna Grace Academy of the Arts. If we have a question there, or maybe if we have one for the executive branch, that would be great.
How do you decide on a law if it's legal or not?
How do you decide on a law if it's legal or not?
I can answer that a little bit. We have an idea, or we want to change something in the system, so we enact the law. But I don't actually write the law, and I actually don't do the research. We have lawyers that are hired to help us to look at whether the law is constitutional or not, or if it's a good law. And there's also what the lawyers do. That's why it's important if you're going to be a lawyer. You can get jobs anywhere. The lawyers that we hire will look at other states and to see if that particular law was passed in either Massachusetts or New York or New Jersey, the surrounding states, and then we'll get ideas that way. So if it was passed in New York, then we'll enact that law in the state of Connecticut. So we don't actually know whether the law is legal or not. It's not until the lawyers that help us tell us that it's legal, or if it's not going to go to court. Because we can enact the law and somebody doesn't like it, and then they can sue the state of Connecticut, and then it has to go to the court, because that has happened. So it all depends on what the law is.
Thank you. Now I'll open it up to any one of the schools, and I would love a question about the executive branch, because we have our state treasurer here, and he has some very interesting things to say.
My question is for the executive branch. It's how do you enforce laws?
How do you enforce laws?
So that's great. So it's why I think, and we've talked about this with the prior group, that really all of these branches of government really work closely together, right? So my office doesn't make laws, but we work a lot with the legislative branch. If there are things that we would like to get passed, we work with the legislature to get that legislation passed. From there, then the enforcement side of that legislation is why, if it's a criminal law, it's why we have law enforcement that's involved in enforcing criminal laws. If it is a civil law, it's why those things can be brought to the judicial branch. If someone violates a civil law, that they can file a lawsuit, and that would then go to the court, and then the court would decide if that law was violated or not, and if somebody ultimately needs to, say, pay someone back if they violated a civil law.
Thank you. Did you want to
So,
add?
for example, we passed a law on baby bonds. And it was an idea that came up through the legislature, through a couple of legislators from Waterbury and Stanford. We all got together, and we're trying to pass this law. It's a few years now, like 3 or 4 years. And we passed the law, so then it was Treasurer Russell's job to make sure that he made it work. So you want to talk about that?
Yeah, sure. So Connecticut Baby Bonds is a program that was kickstarted by my predecessor, so the treasurer who was there before me. And it's ultimately about addressing poverty in Connecticut. So for every child who's born into poverty now in Connecticut, there'll be $3,200 that's invested in a trust, and that's managed by my office. And that money grows over the life of that child, and when they're between the ages of 18 and 30, they can access it for causes that are about building wealth. So to help purchase a home in Connecticut, to start or invest in a Connecticut business, to help pay for college. And when the law was first passed, obviously a program like this takes a lot of money to fund, right? And there was an agreement on how to fund the program, even though the law had been passed. And so when I came in, I had to try to think of some different ways where we could come up with the money to fund the program, and we worked closely with the legislature to get that done, and we were able to figure out a way to do it. But I think that's an example of even when you pass a law sometimes, there are still some other steps that need to be taken. If that law requires money or other things, we have to all work collaboratively to find ways to get those things done.
Great. That's a great example of how the branches really need to work together to serve the people of Connecticut, to make sure that everything is done properly, that people's ideas are being made into laws and being used to make life better for everybody. So that was a really good example. Now, I think that question was from Renzulli, from a student at Renzulli. So let's go on now to Ivy Drive School. If you have a question, one more question. Yes. What is the hardest part of your job?
Very good question. So I would say the first thing is that because in the executive office, so the treasurer's office is completely separate from other offices. I run my own team. We run all of our own thing. We have about 140 employees. And so first I would say is just managing a team, because we have a lot of people who are doing this work every day that I'm responsible for overseeing and making sure we're all moving in the right direction. I think the other piece is it's the collaboration, right? It's that in government, nothing can happen by you trying to do it on your own. And I think it's the same thing that you probably see in your classrooms, right? Is if you want to do something really important and really big, it's always a lot easier if you're working with other people to do it, right? And so my goal when I'm doing a lot of this work is making sure that we're working as a team, not just within the office, but that we're working with the legislature, that we're working with other branches of government to make sure that we are putting out the best product for our state. And a lot of my work is on the finances of the state, right? So I manage all of the state's money, if you think about our pension funds, so if any of your parents work for the state, or if any of your parents are teachers, or like your teachers here, they all pay into a retirement account, and I manage all of that money. It's about $50 billion that we have in our pension funds. I also manage all of the money that comes in and out of the state every year. And so that's money that the legislature spends, right, that they decide where that money's going. But I have to manage all of it coming in and out. That's about $250 billion every year. And so it's a lot of responsibility, but it's also great when you're able to work and collaborate with other people to get things done.
Thank you. And Justice Evely, what's the hardest part of your job?
I was just thinking about that. Right now, I would say the hardest part over 25 years of being a judge, the hardest part that I've ever had as a judge was in sentencing someone found guilty of a crime, and what the appropriate sentence was based on their background, maybe prior history, and trying to make a fair sentence for people that compared with similar crimes, so that no one got a disparate sentence, and you tried to make it as equal as possible. And a lot of people, I think, feel that way. That by far is the most difficult part of the job that I had.
Thank you. That would be hard. I think you all have very challenging jobs, but and you can see that it takes a lot of creative thinking to do these jobs. As we've heard before, a lot of reading. You have to know math if you're going to be handling billions of dollars. There's a lot you have to know, and all of that can help to make a job easier. So I think next we have Gainfield Elementary School is the next school with a question. That question is, once a bill becomes a law, how long does it take to go into effect?
That's a good question. Once a bill becomes the law, it all depends on the decision that we make as legislators when it becomes a law. So we enact the law, the Senate chambers has to approve it. We have to approve it in the House because they're on the third floor and we're on the second floor. So we have to work together to pass that law. Then the governor has to sign the law. If the governor doesn't sign the law, it doesn't become a law. Then we have to go back to the drawing board again. It might be something in there he doesn't like or something he wants to add. But all that work is already done in the beginning. So then the governor signs it. But in the legislation, in the bill, we put a date of when that law starts. So we can either use July 1st because the session ends in June. That's when we do the budget, the two-year budget. And then let's say we want to start July 1st, so then it starts July 1st. But let's say we want to change something like the bottle, you get 5 cents deposit on your bottles, your empties when you take them back. We enacted that law like 2 or 3 years ago because we wanted to give a chance to the bottle people, the recyclers, a chance to change their technology and change their machines in order that instead of now that you put in for a bottle, you get 10 cents, right? So starting October 1st of last year, of 2022, you now get 10 cents for your bottles. So it all depends on what the law is. So it either can start July 1st, it can start October 1st, or it can start January 1st of this year. So it all depends because we have to be sensitive to when a law can take effect to give people a chance to get to know the law. So we might have to do education, we have to tell the schools, we have to tell your parents, we have to tell the community, and that might take time. So it all depends on what the law is. So there's different dates that we use.
Thank you. Would either of you like to add to that answer? No, that was perfect answer. Thank you. Okay, now on a Grace School, it's your chance to ask a question. Yes? Is there a certain person who was in the executive branch the longest? Thank you.
So it varies at different times. So right now, I would say in the executive branch, it would be our lieutenant governor. She's been in this role the same amount of time that the governor has, but she was in other offices in the executive branch before. So she was Secretary of State at one point as well. And she was, so she had run for different offices, and she was actually in the legislature for many years before that as well. And so that's the case right now. We have a lot of new constitutional officers. So I just got elected about a year ago. The new Secretary of State, Stephanie Thomas, got elected at the same time just about a year ago. She was actually a state representative before she ran for Secretary of State. And then Sean Scanlon is our comptroller, and he was also a state representative before he ran for comptroller. And so those are all new officers. And then our Attorney General has been there. This is his second or third term now as Attorney General. And then the governor and lieutenant governor have been there for about 5 years now each.
That's good to have different numbers of years of experience for people to work together. Justice Avale and Representative Santiago, would you like to comment on longevity in your branches?
I'll just say that the state reps and the state senators run every 2 years. They run every 4 years. And we can't change that for us because if it's in the state constitution that we can only run every 2 years. So in order to change the terms, then we would have to put a referendum out there for the citizens and the voters of the state of Connecticut to vote to change the Constitution. So right now, we only run every 2 years. The governor runs every 4 years. And he can run for as many years as he wants. Every 4 years is one term. So I run every 2 years, so I ran, this is my 6th term, so that means it's what, 12 years, right? 6 times 2 is 12 years. So I wish it was longer than that, because when I was on the city council at the local level in Meriden, and I was a city councilor, our terms were 4 years. So when I got in 2005, I was a city councilor, and then I ran again 4 years later. So it all depends on the branches, and the judges are a little bit different too.
Yes, we're appointed for 8-year terms, so we have to, every 8 years, we have to go back, and hopefully the governor reappoints us, and then we must go before the Judiciary Committee to be interviewed, and then the General Assembly has to vote on us to be reapproved for another 8 years. In terms of longevity, I think there's currently a judge who's been sitting around 45 years. We have had some judges who were still hearing cases over age 100. I don't think there are presently any. The oldest right now, I think, is someone who's 89, the person who's been around for 45, but he's still hearing trials, mostly family trials in New Haven at age 89, and he's still very, very sharp. So.
That's really interesting. So there are all kinds of different lengths of times that people serve in their positions. And here's a fun fact. When this building was the state capitol of Connecticut, and you've all been to the kid governor's office by now, and that was the real adult governor's office for many years when this was state capitol, the governor ran every single year. He had to run not every 2 years, not every 4 years. He wasn't appointed. He had to be elected every single year. So he was almost always running for office back then in the 19th century. So things change over time, and it's because the constitutional requirements change, because the people of Connecticut vote for those changes. So there are a lot of ways that government can change over time to better suit maybe what's going on in the world at that time. So it's really important to stay up to date and keep apprised of the news, listen to the news, watch the news, read the news, and just know what's going on in your community so that you can understand how government can best work for you. So we are just about at the end of this time. We've got 4 minutes left. So I'm going to ask each of our guests to give a minute of advice for you.
Well, I said before, particularly both as a trial judge and on the Supreme Court and the Appellate Court, it was, particularly the Supreme Court, it was not uncommon for each case to involve, between the briefs and appendix and transcripts of trial, about 5,000 pages of reading per case. So you had to love to read. So what I would encourage you, and I'm sure you all do this anyhow, but continue your love of reading, whatever that may be, as you move on in your education, because whatever job you may go into, it'll involve some element of reading and or writing. When I speak to school groups, one of the common questions is, what would I recommend for someone who's a lawyer to go into and a major in college? And I used to say what I did, which I look back on, and it was a mistake just because I love political science and history. That's what I majored in. If I had it to do all over, what I tell all the students that I speak to is I would major in English and writing, because it's amazing. I have to analyze writing all the time. And even lawyers preparing briefs, I would say about 25% of them are not well written. And it means a lot. It's how you communicate, how you persuade. So if you want to go into law, for whatever it's worth, I recommend you major in English and writing and continue your love of reading throughout your career.
Thank you.
And that's a great suggestion. I just want to add that a lot of people think that to be a state rep or a state senator, you have to be rich. You have to have a lot of money. You don't. In the state of Connecticut, we have campaign financing. So that means that we raise $5,000 from our town, and then we apply for a grant through the state of Connecticut, and we get another $32,000 to run a campaign. Because let me tell you, I don't make that kind of money. So this legislature, as a state rep, we only get paid $40,000 a year. It used to be $28,000, now it's $40,000. So you have to have another job to be a state legislator. And we have a lot of lawyers up there that can do that. No, it's not a bad thing. But they have a business and they can, get out of their job, their lawyer. They can schedule their court dates around their schedule. But we made it easy in the state of Connecticut that if you're a regular mom or a regular worker or a business owner, a lawyer, a prior judge, a nurse, a doctor, we've had DJs, we've had all kinds of folks that have been representatives and state senators. You can run for politics because in the state of Connecticut, we have a grant. The state senators get a little bit more money. They get about up to $80,000, I believe, plus the $15,000 that they raise, because they represent more people in the state. But if you like helping people and you like advocating for them, and when I was small, and I lived in New York City, and my parents didn't know a lot of English, I was the one that went to the doctors with them. I was the one that dealt with issues in school because I had to translate. And that's how I started being an advocate. And then when I had my son, who has a learning disability, the school system didn't want to help me. So I had to fight for him in Meriden to get services that he needed because he needed to be in special ed. And if he wasn't put into special ed, he probably never would have graduated from high school. So I had to advocate as a parent for my son. And there were people that were making those decisions that didn't look like me. A mother raising 2 kids, head of household, and a woman, and Latina. So I started fighting for rights of people a very long time ago, helping parents out. And then eventually, when a position became available in Meriden, I went to get elected for the city council. My first election, I only raised like $2,000. But I did run for the Board of Ed in Meriden, and I lost that election. So I didn't give up. So I lost my first election. I lost my second election before I became a city councilor, but I didn't give up because I felt that I had that special voice to bring issues to the table, again, because people that were making those decisions didn't look like me and didn't know what it was to work 3 jobs to raise 2 kids. So that's one of the reasons why I went into politics, because there are still a lot of people in the state of Connecticut that are going through those problems. And I want to be able to be that voice to help them change legislation and make things better for them. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'll keep this really short because I know we're running tight on time. I would say the first piece is that listening is one of the best skills that you can develop, because anything that you do, right, you will be better at if you can listen to those around you, whether it's so that you can collaborate with other people to make things happen, or if you're thinking about the job of being in elected office, so much of it is about being able to hear and understand what other people around you are experiencing and what they need. And if you're a good listener, you're going to be able to pick up on those things. Second, I would say, is chase whatever dreams you want and go after it and work for it. I was the first person in my family to graduate from college. When I was growing up, I never thought that that was an opportunity for me. I went off to law school, and I've been able to do a lot of things that I never could have imagined when I was growing up. So some of these things that may seem really far-fetched, if there's things that you care about, if there are dreams that you want to chase, put in the work and go after it. Because I think it's all accomplishable if you are willing to put the work behind it.
And you work hard.
Thank you very much. We really appreciated the answers to your questions. We appreciated the questions. So a warm thank you to our guests today. Thank you for being here.